at the height of his power, Pablo Escobar was responsible for smuggling 80% of the cocaine entering the United States. He was one of the richest men in the world, with a personal fortune estimated at over $30 billion. He owned a private zoo, a fleet of planes, and an army of He bribed presidents and murdered judges. He built hospitals and neighborhoods for the poor, while simultaneously bombing airliners and massacring police officers. This is the story of Pablo Escobar, the man who became more powerful than the Colombian government itself, and whose war against the state would leave thousands dead. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1, 1949, in Rionegro, Colombia, a small town near Medellin. His family was lower middle class. His father was a farmer, his mother a schoolteacher. There was nothing in Pablo's early life that suggested he would become the most powerful criminal in history. But from a young age, Pablo was ambitious. He told his family he would be a millionaire by the time he was 22. He just did tell them how. Growing up in Medellin in the 1950s and 60s, Pablo saw poverty everywhere. Colombia was a country of extreme inequality, where a tiny elite controlled vast wealth, while millions struggled to survive. Pablo resented this inequality, and he would later use it to justify his criminal empire. He saw himself not as a criminal, but as a rebel against an unjust system. This self-image would define his entire life. Pablo's criminal career began with petty crimes. As a teenager, he stole tombstones, sandblasted off the names, and resold them. He sold fake lottery tickets and smuggled cigarettes. These weren't glamorous crimes, but they taught Pablo important lessons about corruption, bribery, and the weaknesses of law enforcement. By his early 20s, Pablo had graduated to car theft and kidnapping. He was building a reputation as someone smart, ruthless, and completely without moral boundaries. In the early 1970s, Pablo Escobar discovered cocaine. At the time, cocaine was a relatively minor drug in Colombia, used mostly by wealthy elites. But in the United States, demand was exploding. Cocaine was becoming the drug of choice for celebrities, Wall Street traders, and millions of Americans who could afford it. Pablo recognized a historic business opportunity. He wasn't going to just sell cocaine. He was going to industrialize it. Pablo started by working with other smugglers, learning the routes, the methods, and the contacts. But he quickly realized he could do it better. He began building his own organization, recruiting pilots, chemists, distributors, and enforcers. By the mid-1970s, Pablo wasn't just a smuggler. He was the founder of the Medellin cartel, the most sophisticated drug trafficking organization the world had ever seen. The scale of Pablo's operation was staggering. At its peak, the Medellin cartel was producing and smuggling 15 tons of cocaine into the United States every single day. They used planes, boats, submarines, and even trained dogs to transport the product. They had laboratories hidden in the Colombian jungle, capable of processing thousands of kilos. They had distribution networks in every major American city. And the profits were astronomical. By the early 1980s, Pablo Escobar was making so much money, he couldn't count it fast enough. He reportedly spent $2,500 per month just on rubber bands to hold his cash. He had so much currency that rats would eat millions of dollars worth of bills in his storage warehouses, and he considered it a normal cost of business. In 1987, Forbes magazine listed him as the 7th richest man in the world, with a personal fortune of over $30 billion. But Pablo wasn't content with just being rich. He wanted respect, legitimacy, and political power. In Medellin, he positioned himself as a Robin Hood figure. He built entire neighborhoods for the poor, called them Barrio Pablo Escobar, and gave away houses for free. He built soccer fields, hospitals, and schools. He personally handed out money to people on the streets. To the residents of Medellin's poorest barrios, Pablo wasn't a drug dealer. He was a saint. This popular support gave Pablo political ambitions. In 1982, he was elected as an alternate member of Colombia's Congress. For Pablo, this was the ultimate validation. The poor kid from Rionegro had become a congressman. But his political career was short. Journalists and politicians began exposing his criminal background, and Pablo was forced to resign. This humiliation enraged him, and it marked a turning point. If the Colombian establishment wouldn't accept him, he would destroy them. Pablo declared war on the Colombian government. His weapon was terror. He ordered the assassinations of judges, politicians, journalists, and police officers. Anyone who opposed him became a target. In 1984, his sicarios murdered Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonella, who had been leading the fight against the cartels. The assassination shocked Colombia and triggered a massive government crackdown. But Pablo escalated further. In Ijobawu, the Medellin cartel financed an attack on Colombia's Supreme Court by the M19 guerrilla group. 35 people died, including 11 Supreme Court justices. In 1989, Pablo ordered the bombing of Avianca Flight 203, killing all 107 people on board in an attempt to assassinate a presidential candidate who wasn't even on the plane. That same year, his men detonated a truck bomb outside the DEAS intelligence headquarters in Bogotá, killing 63 people and injuring over 600. The violence was unimaginable. Pablo created a program called Plata o Plomo, silver or lead. Accept a bribe or take a bullet. Colombian police officers were assassinated by the hundreds. Over 600 police officers were killed during Pablo's war against the state. He offered bounties for dead cops' money, paid for every uniform killed. Medellin became the murder capital of the world, with over 6,000 homicides per year at the height of Pablo's power. But Pablo justified all of it. He saw himself as a victim of persecution by the Colombian elite and the United States government. He positioned himself as a nationalist hero, fighting against extradition to the United States, which he called the ultimate violation of Colombian sovereignty. Many Colombians, particularly the poor, who benefited from his charity, agreed with him. By 1991, the Colombian government was desperate to end the violence. They offered Pablo a deal: surrender, and you won't be extradited to the United States. You'll serve your sentence in a Colombian prison that you can design yourself. Pablo accepted. He built La Catedral, a luxury prison on a hill overlooking Medellin. It had a soccer field, a bar, a jacuzzi, and comfortable bedrooms. Pablo continued running his drug empire from inside, held parties, and essentially lived in a 5-star resort. But in 1992, when authorities learned that Pablo had tortured and killed associates inside La Catedral, they attempted to transfer him to a real prison. Pablo escaped. For the next 16 months, he became the most wanted man in the world. The United States sent special forces and provided intelligence. Colombia created Search Block, an elite unit dedicated solely to capturing or killing Pablo. His former allies formed Los Pepis, a vigilante group that murdered his associates and destroyed his properties. Pablo was on the run, moving from safe house to safe house, watching his empire collapse around him. His family fled to Germany, but were denied asylum and forced to return. His associates were arrested or killed. His money was seized. The man who had once controlled billions was reduced to hiding in middle-class neighborhoods with a small group of bodyguards. On December 2, 1993, Colombian security forces tracked Pablo to a middle-class house in Medellin, using radio triangulation. When they surrounded the building, Pablo and his bodyguard attempted to escape across the rooftops. Gunfire erupted. Pablo Escobar was shot multiple times and fell from the roof. He died on a hot tile roof in Medellin, one day after his 44th birthday. The king of cocaine was dead. The reaction in Colombia was mixed. The government celebrated. The United States called it a victory in the war on drugs. But in the poor barrios of Medellin, thousands mourned. Over 25,000 people attended Pablo's funeral, many crying openly for the man who had built their homes and given them opportunities. To them, Pablo was a hero, regardless of his crimes. But the truth about Pablo Escobar is far more complicated than either hero or villain. He was responsible for the deaths of thousands of innocent people. Police officers, judges, politicians, journalists, and civilians, killed in bombings and assassinations. His cocaine poisoned millions of lives in the United States and around the world. His violence destabilized an entire nation for over a decade. Yet, he also built neighborhoods, schools, and hospitals. He provided opportunities for people the government had forgotten. He challenged the Colombian elite and fought against extradition. To understand Pablo, you must understand that he contained contradictions. He could be generous and monstrous, patriotic and terroristic, a family man and a mass murderer. His legacy haunts Colombia to this day. The violence he unleashed changed the country forever. The cocaine trade he industrialized continues to fuel cartels, gangs, and violence across Latin America. The methods he pioneered, bribing officials, assassinating opponents, using terror as a negotiating tool, became the playbook for every cartel that followed. His family has tried to rebuild their lives. His widow and children changed their names and live in Argentina, constantly dealing with the shadow of Pablo's crimes. His son Juan Pablo, now Sebastian Marroquin, has spoken publicly about his father, condemning the violence while acknowledging the complex man he knew. The mythology around Pablo has grown since his death. Netflix's Narcos turned him into an anti-hero for global audiences. Books, documentaries, and tours of his properties treat him as a fascinating historical figure. In Medellin, you can visit the ruins of his estate, Hacienda Naples, now a theme park. His story has become entertainment, which troubles many Colombians who remember the terror firsthand. But perhaps the most important question about Pablo Escobar is what he represents. He was a product of inequality, corruption, and the insatiable American demand for cocaine. He exploited all of these things brilliantly, building an empire that made him richer than most nations. He showed that in a corrupt system, crime can be more profitable than any legitimate business. The Colombian government that fought Pablo was itself deeply corrupt. The police he battled took bribes. The politicians he opposed were often criminals themselves. Pablo didn't create Colombia's problems. He exploited them. And when he was gone, the problems remained. New cartels emerged to fill the vacuum. The Cali cartel, the Norte del Valle cartel, and eventually the Mexican cartels that dominate today's drug trade. Pablo Escobar died on a rooftop in Medellin on December 2, 1993, but the systems that created him survive. The poverty that drove him to crime still exists in Colombia and throughout Latin America. The American appetite for cocaine continues to fuel the trade. The corruption he exploited remains endemic in many institutions. In that sense, Pablo won. His empire fell, but the drug war continues, decades later, with no end in sight. Today, Medellin has transformed itself. It's become a modern city, a tech hub, a tourist destination. The murder rate has dropped dramatically, but the memory of Pablo Escobar lingers. For some, he's a villain who terrorized a nation. For others, he's a folk hero who challenged the powerful. The truth is, he was both, and neither. He was a complex, contradictory man who became the most powerful criminal in history and paid the ultimate price. Pablo Escobar was killed by Colombian security forces on December 2, 1993. In Medellin at age 66, his Medellin cartel was dismantled, but the cocaine trade continues today, generating billions of dollars annually and fueling violence across Latin America.